Hey everyone, Dan here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. And keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not meant to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work for yourself, and make your decisions based on that. Enjoy. All right, folks, here we are on Monday, February 19th. We're going to take a look at Pixelworks today. So I put out a video, I guess maybe a couple of weeks ago on Pixelworks. It was one of these breaking news videos that I've started to do middle of the day. I think that one had to do with some news about a Disney deal or renewed Disney deal. And, the stock was getting a little jumpy on that news. It's since continued to push up. It had this gap here. Look. That gap here that we had called out with these purple lines has recently filled that and pushed through nearish to the $3 level, but folks got a little bit gun shy. Probably a couple of things. One, sure, there's the psychological $3 level of like, are we really going to push this to $3? The other thing is this was down at 101 on in the first week of December. So we're just 10 weeks or so after that, and it's that would have been approaching tripling the price. So it's that's certainly going to raise some questions, I'm sure, for the oomph or the gusto that the bulls may or may not have. Now, I don't know a ton about this, but I just did want to mention, there's sort of like a weird chain of events. This earning, when the earnings came out, their Q4 loss increases and they missed estimates, says this article. And then the following day, there were some analysts that came out, maintained buy, and then this one actually rating affirmed with strong growth and raised price target. So I actually got a message. Somebody asked me to come in and take another look based on these, analyst ratings, and this interesting, it's just interesting that they raised the price target even though apparently they had missed their estimates. Maybe they feel that there's some good prospective guidance ahead or some good quarters looming, but we'll see. In any case, chart wise, one thing that I'll just call attention to, I'm not going to put it on the chart right now just because it's pretty far away, but there's a gap that it would fill down here at about 151, and it would enter that gap at about 166. So not the biggest gap, but not a snoozer either. And if it does get some motion in that direction and slips the $2 level, then maybe you might want to start looking at it and say, okay, is this going to just sort of capitalize on this pullback and draw this price down to interact with this gap and potentially try to fill it? So quite far away at the moment, but it can have some pretty explosive and erratic moves. Recently those have been to the upside, but just keep in mind that's volatile stocks. That volatility can go in both directions. So just be aware of that if you're not already. Now the nearest in levels are still these gap levels, this 270 nearest in support level, and then 275, which is right where it ended in the after hours on Friday. So we'll see if it's going to try to push through there again as we get into it on Tuesday, or what that's going to look like. Now, the levels that I see, I know there's like really recent price action here, but scrolling back left, the price action that I saw was actually more sort of impressive to me, or felt like stronger levels here just above the $3 level. So 304 and then 317. And in between there, the stock, it's hit some stopping points, right? Like it's like 281-ish area. That could be something. I didn't feel like it was necessarily as strong as these two levels, but there's that. But otherwise, it does tend to move, or at least it has in the past moved relatively quickly through this range. So I'm curious to see if it does get the push above 275 again, and maybe it sort of gets into the 280s. Like I said, that 281-ish level, I think there's probably potential for some stickiness there, right here where the cursor is. But beyond that, I do wonder if it does have just some sort of like flow potential where it's going to flow relatively quickly through that range, or if it's going to take the opportunity to put in some more price action and sort of like build out some additional support and resistance levels. If it follows what I already sort of see some small indications of on the chart, like we said, that 281 level, and then here around this like 296 level, that to me is the psychological $3 level. It's the approach toward 3, and folks really wondering, are we really going to push this to 3? And then that 3045 is sort of on the other side of that. It's, you know, the market kind of wondering, are we really going to hold this stock over 3, continue to buy it and stabilize the price here, or even push it further up into the $3 range, you know? So I think that those are kind of the mind game elements of it, if you will. So, but that's basically the range as far as I see it, from 192 up to 317, and a couple of levels that, again, I'm just not quite ready to put on the chart yet, for fear of making it too cluttered and then just harder to look at and track. Now let's flip over to the think or swim side of things and see what that chart looks like. Okay, so here we see a couple of things happening. One, we have this sort of series of triggers and fires on the TTM squeeze indicator, right? This trigger and fire, nothing happened. This was just a 1 candle trigger, so that may have just been sort of an anomaly, if you will. Similarly here, this 2 candle trigger, you know, it's just sort of like stands out like a sore thumb, like you know, nothing comes of it, and it's just so brief. But then you had another decent trigger here, and still nothing happened. So, you know, it's not uncommon that we see a trigger and fire that nothing comes of, and then a re-trigger and a refire, and that's where a big move comes. This one, for whatever reason, had to go through this third, you know, full trigger and fire, and then it got the push up out of the channel. So, you know, I can sort of think of that as a couple of different things. One, either this is just the case with this stock, and that's just the way it played out, or that the TTM squeeze indicator was just sort of giving some misfires, I call them, on the indicator, right? No indicator is 100%, of course, and sometimes the TTM squeeze indicator, for example, it just sort of doesn't work, if you will. It gives you the signal, and then nothing happens. So I'm sort of wondering, like, was this sort of a fluke, and it just happened to get this big move based on that? But you do see sort of it was doing the same thing the whole time, right? So, you know, the things that are putting the trigger in place were just sort of like consistently there. Price pinned to the mid-range of the channel. This channel quite compressed, right? It's a pretty tight channel, and it just continued that way for a very long time. So in that way, it doesn't surprise me that it was just sort of like triggering, firing, triggering, firing, triggering, firing. And then it finally broke. But I think, you know, we could have picked that out without the trigger and fire, the TTM squeeze indicator at all, just because the price became so compressed in the channel. You know, you flow back, you see how it was wider. There was so much movement here. It was out the lower bound of the channel and barely worked its way back in, was trying to hold for dear life inside the channel. And then the channel, you know, got a little bit of motion in there, but then it just started to compress, right? All within this range. Slight movements in both directions, but, you know, pretty sideways, pretty compressed. And then, you know, that would have led us to, you know, there's potential. This is showing potential for a big move coming. You know, luckily for the bulls, this time around, that big move came to the upside. You know, my question now is, it spent quite a few days up out of the upper bound of the channel. Anytime it's out of the channel to the upside or to the downside, you know, the look is always, when is it going to come back into the channel, and when it's going to retest the mid-range of the channel. So it's, you know, it's outside of the channel, but it's pretty close, right? It's kind of using this upper bound of the channel as support for the moment. Histogram still showing like the bullish momentum is picking up, but it's potentially slowing down a little bit here. We'll see how that continues to take shape in the days ahead. But, you know, I do wonder, you know, what's going to happen when it actually gets back into the channel here. Does it find some support above the mid-range, or does it come down relatively quickly to the full mid-range, this bright blue line in the center of the channel, to test that? And then, you know, that's always an interesting fork in the road. Is it going to use that as support and maybe rally again? Is it going to pin itself like we saw here and just kind of consolidate before its next move? Or is it going to lose support to the mid-range of the channel and get sort of shoved down, like we saw here, and maybe not pushed out of the channel, but right, like here it was trying to push above, slipped it, and then it really just had quite a falter. So we'll see, but just because the stock is up out of the channel, it doesn't mean that it can't continue to stay there. But I do start to look, especially as it's been several days, how much is still in the tank here. And maybe there's a lot, maybe there's catalyst coming, who knows. But we'll see. But that's sort of my biggest question at the moment, is how long can it maintain this motion above the upper bound of the channel? Because it's already made, like we said, from down here at 101 in just about 10 weeks or so, getting darn close to tripling the share price. And that's a lot to ask. So we'll see where it goes from here. All right, folks, I hope that you've enjoyed your long weekend. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.